I heard that a bunch of people, there's a class from Järna, is that right? Who's it? Who are you guys? All right, love it. And you're from, did I get 16 different countries? 30 different countries. That's amazing. So, yeah, it's twice as good. That's very, very cool. And where are other people from? I'm waiting for, yeah, I need to start talking because otherwise I'm going to have time to get nervous and forget what I'm going to talk about. So if I just keep my mouth busy, I can't think too much or overthink the situation. I've got a thumbs up, so I'd love to hear where you're all from later. So I want to say welcome to you all and thank you for giving me the mic. My name's Miriam Wietrich. I'm a researcher and a teacher at the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University. And I'm not a climate scientist, but my research does look a lot at what are the impacts of climate change on different aspects of society and different aspects of the world we live in and how we interact with it. So I started doing a more ecology background and doing environmental biology, moved into systems ecology, and then have moved even further with political science, political economics. And what I work with, the easiest way to describe it is I work on what's called social ecological systems. And that's very much at the essence of what we work with at the Stockholm Resilience Center. It's the idea that we can't separate humans from the ecosystems and environment. So that's also often very much a given, but it actually complicates both the research but also the decision making, because it means you need to have a breadth of understanding before you start to take action. So I think it's exceptionally cool to hear, for example, of a group of 32 nationalities come together, because whether you like it or not, you're going to have a breadth of understanding that's really hard to get hold of anywhere else. I'm doing this slightly off the cuff, so please ask me questions when I'm not clear, and I'm aiming to hold this to 15-20 minutes, okay? So my work and what I want to bring today is not the climate statistics or understanding of what is behind climate change, but instead it's trying to bring it back to levels that make it meaningful so we can understand how do we play a part in those trends that we see now that's behind the climate change, carbon dioxide levels. So that's one of my goals. And the other is actually to push for moving away from thinking only about carbon dioxide and having a bigger picture. Not that it's not important and that we need to address that but it's how we address it needs to come with a broader spectrum of thinking than some of the solutions that are up on the table right now. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And usually what I start with asking is, where were you for breakfast this morning? What did you have for breakfast and where were you?
Had some bread.
Bread?
Skipped my breakfast, was on the farm.
Oh, that is not a good way to start your day. As a mother, I say that's very bad.
Muesli office.
Muesli in the office. Anything else? Anyone have orange juice? Orange coffee?
I had coffee.
Yeah. The truth comes out. How about chocolate? No, nothing chocolate based. Yeah, we've got a chocolate taker. So already, actually at breakfast, you were on the four corners of the planet. Most of the orange juice in Sweden comes from Brazil. The coffee will come from Central America or Asia. Your chocolate will be coming from West Africa or Madagascar. The wheat, by and large, comes from France, but whatever can't be covered will come from Australia or the US. So before you've even left the door, you've had your foot in all the different continents on the planet. So that's why straight away we're all affected and affecting these issues around us, whether we like it or not, and whether we care about it or not. And many times we're thinking about, what does the environment do for us? How many of you have heard the term ecosystem services? A few hands. Okay, so this is a term, at least in Swedish it's ekosystemtjänster. Essentially it's a concept that is, what do we get from nature? So it's very much for humans, but what are the benefits? Because most of the time we're thinking about wheat, wood, textiles, but we forget about clean water. Stockholm, we're pretty unusual. We live in our drinking water. We drink that. That's what we drink every day. So whatever goes in it, we've got to take care of it, right? So these are some of the thinkings that you need to keep in mind. So we've often think about, what does the ecosystems give us? But actually, it's also, what do we give the ecosystems? Because that's what we get back. So that connection is often forgotten. And it's a problem because ecosystem services have become a way of setting a dollar sign on different values in the environment. How much is this park worth? Well, people will come and measure that for different things, for recreation, for slowing water runoff into the lake, for stopping soil runoff, for how much carbon dioxide it may or may not absorb in the city, how much noise it might absorb, or air pollution. So those are things that people can put dollar signs on. But that's often a one-way journey and thinking about these ecosystems. So that's one thing that I really want to hammer home, is thinking about it. It's very much a two-way thing. And that's what we mean by social ecological systems. We can't pretend that we're disconnected from them, even when we're in this very un-ecosystem-y environment, or what we think of as ecosystems. So that's one thing, and so that's one step of how do we connect to these really large-scale processes. And what we see now, and what many are calling the Anthropocene, is that we're changing these really large-scale geological processes that up until recently actually limited what we could do. Where could we live? Where could we do things? But now we're changing them, not because we want to. It's just like a side effect of our actions. So we're not even thinking about it in most of the activities we do, but we're changing them. One of these processes is the carbon cycle, and the imbalance and the change in how it's balancing out. And we've got too much carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we know that that is linked to our activities. So if we're bringing stuff from all over the planet already at breakfast, it doesn't take long to see how does that get multiplied in the various actions that I do, or my neighborhood does, or my country does, or the EU does, and so on. So that's how we fit into this puzzle. And that's also why my changes are important, of course. I think my changes are most important just because I'm forced to think about these relationships and thinking about the steps of what I do. The really big changes is what you're pushing for, trying to push politicians who have a much larger scale in action. So politicians, the big industries, the big groups that if they were to change how and what they do, the scale of change would be enormous. So what do we want them to do? So we know what we don't want them to do. And we want to get, for example, carbon dioxide down. But one of the ways of doing that is, well, let's just plant trees. And that's a wonderful thing. I love a good tree. But there's a very big difference between a forest and a plantation. A forest is an ecosystem type that gives all kinds of other ecosystem services, going back to that example before. And the only reason a forest can do that is because it has a complex assemblage of different species, different ages. Some species are local, some migrate between other areas. So we need other areas to support that forest. When you have a plantation, it's the same species, it's the same age. So you actually have, they're deserts, species deserts that are doing one thing. It matters, it's an important thing. But this is why I want you to think beyond just the CO2 level and thinking about this is why biodiversity matters and protecting our biodiversity. How do we keep our functioning ecosystems functioning? Because they do a lot. We're dependent on them directly for the food we eat and clean air, but so many other things that we don't think about. So the species that keep a forest living, many of them are migratory. Well, where do they go? So I don't know if any of you have read about now in the last weeks in Western US, millions of migratory birds have just dropped dead from the sky. They don't know why, but they think it's to do with the smoke from the fires on the West Coast. Now, that's tragic in and of itself and devastating, but what are the impacts on the environments, their ecosystems that they were coming from or that they're going to? We don't know. Not yet. We'll find out eventually. But it's like a ticking bomb. We don't see the effects immediately. And that's why it's important to keep a much bigger understanding of these systems than simple solutions. Simple solutions are great, but they often don't solve the complexity of the situations that we're facing. And that's why I think it's really important to think beyond just CO2. We can get it down with trees, or we can get it down with these large-scale experiments in the ocean. They may be important, they may be necessary, but let's start by looking after and understanding what we have. And so that's the systems approach and the systems thinking of thinking of ourselves as a social ecological system interacting with what we're a part of. And I think I'm going to stop there. If you have any questions, go ahead. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
May I ask?
Yeah, you're the hand.
It was great. Thank you for the presentation. So do your workers also work on concrete, complex solutions? Like instead of planting that first plantation also, like what to do else? I mean, this was just your example. Like, we work on these concrete solutions that are required.
So we work as a center. We work on a diversity of different approaches for addressing that. So, and it depends on. Sometimes there's work being done at local levels, at the municipality level, or national levels, or global levels, global processes. Who should be at the table can be one aspect. Sometimes that's what matters, what views, what interests need to be. Sometimes it's about, well, what are we talking about the Amazon? So what's going on there and why? So that will then you need to address, adapt solutions and options for that. So I think it's the, yes, so we do look at the range of solutions, but it's not, I mean, we will never come out with a solution that says, do these 5 things and we're good and everyone can go home. No, I'm not suggesting that's what you're saying. Perspectives, but also finding alternatives to how we do things. Yeah.
The alternative to forest plantations in Sweden, if you take a small problem.
The alternative to, so the question is what's the alternative to forest plantations in Sweden? So Sweden's quite interesting because there's a lot of trees in Sweden, a lot. And so I don't have the exact statistics, but it's about 70 to 80% of Sweden is forest covered, but actually 70 to 80% of that forest cover is actually plantation, it's plantation cover. So I think and we've had problems in the past where hurricanes have come through and absolutely ravished huge expanses of forest at a huge individual and community and regional costs.
Yeah, and right now the bark beetle is killing
Yes,
because we only plant
spruce. So the alternative there would be is thinking in patches and thinking about trying to increase the complexity in the landscape.
Long process.
It's a very long process, but it has to start somewhere. Yeah, but I agree. It is that's one of the risks is that a lot of these changes we're going to do them now, but they'll take 50, 70 years to happen. Okay, one question.
I want to ask, well, like what we've studied at DIP was about like regenerative agriculture and soil and the importance of these things, but you said you also studied economics or economic science.
Political economics, yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have like a concrete kind of, or not concrete, but like a solid idea of the kind of economic policy that could help encourage and scale regenerative agriculture to the level that is needed for wilding also.
Oh, that's a huge no. It's my short, but just because of the enormity of the question, and also my general response is there isn't one approach, and it's because it'll depend on what scale you're talking about, because countries are so different, and even within a country it'll depend on local conditions, economic, social, environmental. So I think it's again, you have to look at those pieces. But one of the key things is in thinking about agriculture is we need to think differently about agriculture in general, as opposed to treating our agricultural systems as factories, that we treat them as a machine. We need to actually see that they're biological, ecological systems, that we have to think long term about them and how we use them, as well as how they interact with the other systems around them for eutrophication or runoff and so on. I'm going to stop there. I want to thank the cameraman, because I know you need to be home in 5 minutes. So thank you.